And I think I said in the email, read Acts 1 and 2. Well, we're not going to get through Acts 1 and 2. We're not going to get through Acts 1, I can guarantee you. Hamlet is, if I remember correctly, I probably don't, pretty sure Hamlet's the longest of Shakespeare's plays. If you were to see a production of Hamlet in its entirety, that is without any lines skipped, it would be about 4 hours long without any break, right? Usually parts are omitted simply because acting companies, production companies don't want to put on the full play because it takes too long. A couple of background points, and this is in your introduction to the play, so I'm just kind of emphasizing it. Hamlet dates from around 1600. For some reason, we don't know why, beginning around 1599 or so. I think 1599 is the date of Julius Caesar. Shakespeare moves away from the romantic tragedies, the romantic comedies. Midsummer Night's Dream is a romantic comedy. If you just circle comedy, that's fine, because I didn't give you an option of romantic comedy. But the mid-1590s, he's writing, for the most part, romantic comedies. He's also writing some history plays about English history and such. But beginning around 1599, his imagination kind of turns towards tragedy. And we see beginning 1600, we get Hamlet, and within about 5 or 6 years, we get nearly all of Shakespeare's real important major tragedies. We get Hamlet, we get Othello, we get Macbeth, we get King Lear, okay? Just in a span of about 5 or 6 years. Now, it might be telling, it might be significant that his son Hamlet dies in 1596. Okay? He's only 11 years old. I've never had a child die other than a miscarriage, but I can imagine having an 11-year-old son die would kind of change your outlook on life a little bit.
Do we know how he died?
Illness. I mean, having a child die in the late 16th century, early 17th century was not necessarily an uncommon occurrence. A poet that we will be reading later, John Donne, had, well, let me put it this way. His wife had 12 pregnancies. I think something like 3 of those were stillborn, and I think a total of 5 of the children died no, it was more than that. Like 7 or 8 died in infancy. None of his children and or grandchildren lived out of the 17th century. I mean, they were all born in the 1600s. He didn't have any descendants who lived beyond 1700. They just all died out. Okay? What kind of play is Hamlet? Now, we already said Midsummer Night's Dream, it's a comedy, or more specifically, it's romantic comedy. Shakespeare wrote other kinds of comedies. For example, Comedy of Errors, one of his earliest plays, is a comedy, but it's not necessarily a romantic comedy. It does have romance in it, but it's not the major emphasis of the play. Romance is the major emphasis in Midsummer Night's Dream. Hamlet is a revenge tragedy, right? And what that means is Shakespeare's writing within a tradition that is, other playwrights also wrote revenge tragedies. Thomas Kyd, who's a precursor of Shakespeare, writes Spanish tragedy in 1587. But the genre of revenge tragedy goes back to the Roman period. Okay, and your textbook mentions Seneca. Okay? So what are some of the characteristics of a revenge tragedy? One, at the outset of the play, either you have a person who's already dead or a person who's killed in the opening scene. Okay? And that person then, if the person is killed in the opening scene, that person then comes back as a ghost. Okay? If that person is killed before the play opens, that person comes as a ghost and demands vengeance from his or her, usually his heir, his son usually. Okay? And he'll come in and say, so-and-so killed me. It is your duty as my son to exact vengeance. Get revenge, since I can't because I'm dead. Okay? That then usually leads to, think of the image of dominoes falling. A bunch of dominoes fall. A bunch of people die. Okay? Usually not just the person who committed the murder. Quite a few others will die as well. Usually because of, collateral damage, so to speak. Okay? So, for example, in Hamlet, you get, on page 1603, you get the list of the dramatis personae. Claudius, king of Denmark; Hamlet, son to the late and nephew to the present king. Okay? The late king, the king that is now dead, is Hamlet Sr. Okay? Then we get Polonius, Horatio, Laertes, Voltimand, Cornelius, Rosencrantz, Guildenstern, a gentleman, a priest, and several others. Okay? And you have 4 more on the top of the next page. Well, without naming them, by the end of the play, you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 7 of these characters will be dead. And at the final scene of the play, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them in the final scene on the stage. Okay? We'll actually see them die on the stage. Now, go back to the Romans. In the Roman period, when a character died, or let me go back even farther, ancient Greek period. We're going to read 2 plays by Sophocles after we finish Hamlet. When somebody is killed, when somebody commits suicide, or when somebody dies, in ancient Greek theater, that always occurs off the stage. Because it was considered to be a spectacle. That is, what was meant by that is something that shouldn't be witnessed. Compare that with, films today. I mean, Saw 2, Saw whatever, Freddy Krueger, etc. The more bodies you can have piled up on the stage, the better it is, essentially, in a lot of, action or horror films. Well, ancient Greece, that's not something that should be seen, all right? So you don't do it. You don't do that. By Shakespeare's day, it was allowed. So you have people, for example, play what we're not reading, King Lear. One of the major characters has his eyes gouged out on the stage. Another guy goes up, puts his foot on his chest to hold him in place, and sticks his finger with it. Pop! Okay? Now, they do it with special effects kind of a thing, obviously, because you could only do that role once otherwise. But by Shakespeare's day, that was common, and it was accepted. One other thing. A question to bear in mind as we go through Hamlet is Hamlet really insane? And I need to qualify that. Not when we first see Hamlet, but after Hamlet talks to the ghost. Does he really go insane? Because one of the major questions about this play, from the time it was first performed up to today, is Hamlet really crazy, or is he acting? Or is he mostly acting, but he's also partly crazy? Okay? It'll be an interesting question to ask. Now, if you remember, the other day, I think I put up here. these two diagrams. This one represents tragedy. This one represents comedy. What begins at the beginning of both of them? You have some kind of disaster in society, some kind of rip or rupture in society. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, what was it? Aegeus telling his daughter Hermia she couldn't marry the man she loved. Okay? And that creates this tension, creates this conflict. And it comes down to here, and at this point, the climax, what could happen? He could demand the Athenian law, right? Lysander could be put to death, Hermia could be put to death, in which case it flips over and it becomes a tragedy, okay? Because in a tragedy, what happens at that point of climax is not what we see here. Society begins to be restored. Here, the rupture gets even worse. The tearing becomes even greater. So that when we get to the end of this play, there, even though this is called the point of resolution, there's no resolution in society. At the end of a tragedy, you end up usually with a bunch of people dead. They're dead. They're not going to come back. Okay? With a comedy, what happens is this point of rupture here is totally resolved. The rupture is Hermia is ripped apart, separated from Lysander. You could also say it's Hermia from her father. Okay? But when we get to the end of the play, Hermia and Lysander marry. Her father has to accept that. Why? Because the Duke says, you have to accept this. And what the Duke says goes. Okay? So, start with Hamlet. Notice we're told, location, Elsinore, that's the name of the castle. Okay? A platform before the castle. Platform, level space on the battlements of the royal castle at Elsinore, a Danish seaport. Okay? So, the platform means they're on the battlements. You know, if you've ever seen a picture of a castle, what does the castle, you know, it might have a turret, and the turret has these, and then it's got a wall, and the wall has these, okay? So they're on this part. So this is guard duty. And somebody asks the question, who's there? That question introduces one of the themes of the play. Okay? So, the question is who's there? What does that imply? This isn't rocket science. This is real simple. What does it mean? Who is it? Okay? So somebody's asking the question, right? What's the question mean, though? If you're asking who's there, then what are you, the person doing the asking, doing? You're looking, right? If he's on guard duty, he's guarding. So when he says, who's there, that means a couple of things. One, somebody's out there. And two, I'm looking to see that somebody's out there. So he's observing, he's watching. One of the themes of the play is spying. Or you can be a little less judgmental and just say observing or watching. Okay? We're going to hear the character of Ophelia in about the middle of the play talk about Hamlet, say about Hamlet, that Hamlet is the most observed of all observers. Okay? Most observed of all observers. To be the most observed means what? Everybody's watching you. Of all observers. That means everybody in this society does what to everybody else? They watch. They spy. They look over the fence. They look through the windows. In other words, it's kind of implying to us, nobody minds their own freaking business. They're all looking outside, watching everybody else. And Hamlet is the one seen, watched the most of everybody else. Okay? So Bernardo asks, who's there? Implying, I'm watching, I'm looking, somebody's there. And Francisco says, nay, answer me, stand and unfold yourself. Okay? That is, Francisco says, no, you tell me who's there. It used to be taught, long time ago, quote unquote, phone etiquette. So when you call somebody and they answer, you don't say, the person making the call doesn't say, who is this? The person making the call, according to old phone etiquette, said, hi, this is, give the name, and then the other person replies, this is. And I still, if somebody calls and says, who is this? I'll say, who is this? Don't ask me who I am. You called me. Tell me who you are. And usually, which is why I don't answer my phone in my office, it's somebody I don't know and they're trying to sell me something. So, Bernardo, long live the king. Now, maybe that's code. Doesn't sound very codish, but it does say what? I support the king. So Francisco, Bernardo, yep, that's me. Okay. So we find out what time it is. 'Tis now struck 12. It's midnight. Okay. So they keep talking, and two more characters come in, Horatio and Marcellus. They ask who they are. They tell them we're friends to the king and to the crown, etc., etc. And Marcellus says, Bernardo says, is Horatio there? Horatio's one of the two. He says, yeah, I'm here. And Marcellus says, has this thing appeared again tonight? We don't know what this thing is at this point. Okay? Line 21. Has this thing appeared again tonight? Bernardo, haven't seen anything. Marcellus, Horatio says 'tis but our fantasy. Remember when Theseus talked about shaping fantasies that lovers, madmen, and poets have that give form and habitation to airy nothing? Okay? He's saying that Horatio says we didn't actually see anything. It was our imaginations playing tricks on us. I don't know if you've ever been somewhere where you get billowing fog. Not just the fog like we get every now and then in Murfreesboro, where it's just thick and constant, but the fog that moves and swirls. It's kind of saying, maybe you just saw something in the fog. Okay? So Marcellus goes on, line 24, page 1605. He says, Horatio says 'tis but our fantasy, and will not let belief take hold of him. That is, he won't believe what we said. Touching this dreadful sight, dreaded sight, twice seen of us. Okay, maybe if we saw it once, you could say, I'm seeing things. But he says, we've seen it twice now. All right? And you know what? At almost the exact same time of the night. Horatio will not appear. Why does Horatio say it will not appear? It's not real. Okay? It's not real. Another theme. This kind of gets at something we talked about the other day. Appearance versus reality. Or, another way to look at that, the accidents versus the substance, like we were talking about the other day. Right? So the appearance versus reality. Sometimes something can appear to be what it is not, right? I mean, we say, don't let our eyes deceive us. But we also say, if I see it with my own eyes. Another one of Shakespeare's plays, Othello, which involves a man who's made to believe his wife has been cheating on him. He says, unless I have the ocular proof, unless I see it with my own eyes, and he's kind of implying there, unless I see her physically cheating on me, I won't believe it. Right? And the proof that is given to him is there's a handkerchief that he gave his wife as a love token. It's got embroidered hearts and stuff on it. It's not, used for blowing your nose. It's kind of like something she keeps as a reminder of him. Well, the guy who's trying to get him to believe that his wife is cheating on him gets hold of that, okay, and puts it in the hands of another man and suggests that that man should give it back to Desdemona, the wife who mislaid it. And he does that at such a point that the main character, Othello, is watching. And he sees his right-hand man, his captain, give this thing that his wife said she would never let another man touch. Give it back to her. He takes that to be the ocular proof. Now, how far different is that than catching your wife in bed? It's pretty different, right? I mean, it's not quite the same. So, Horatio says it won't appear. Why? He doesn't believe in its reality. He doesn't believe in the substance of what they say they see. He merely says it's the fog swirling. Okay? Bernardo says, sit down and let us tell you about it again. So they sit down, they start to talk. Last night, the night before, when that star was, in fact, right about where it is now, and what happens? The ghost appears. Now, I've seen productions of this where the ghost doesn't appear. And if the ghost doesn't appear, they just kind of hear something. If the ghost doesn't appear, then you don't have the proof against Horatio. So you've really got to have somebody dressed up, I don't care how you do it, put a white sheet over him. Ooh, ghost, But a ghost has got to appear somehow. And Marcella says, look! Okay, Horatio, quit looking at me. Look over there. In the same figure, like the king that's dead. In fact, it's not just some amorphous ghost, this ball of light kind of thing. It looks like whom? The previous, now dead king, Hamlet Sr. How much does it look like him? We're told it's dressed from head to toe, exactly like he was when he fought his last battle against the former king of Norway, whose name was Fortinbras. The current king of Norway is also named Fortinbras. Fathers kind of name their sons after themselves. Okay? So, the ghost they still see. The ghost doesn't come out and then disappear. Marcella says, speak to it, Horatio. Why is he telling Horatio to speak to it? Why doesn't Marcella speak to it? Why doesn't Bernardo? Or Francisco? Because Horatio is a quote-unquote scholar. All that means is he attends university. He's a college student. Okay? Thou art a scholar, speak to it, Horatio. And they say again, speak to it. Horatio does, line 46. What art thou that usurped this time of night, together with that fair and warlike form in which the majesty of buried Denmark did sometimes march? By heaven, he's appealing to God. God made you speak, okay? And we're told this is kind of a little stage direction. It is offended. So Horatio speaks, and the ghost should turn away and start to move away from them. Oh, you offended it. You should have said by heaven, you know. If it's a ghost, do ghosts come from heaven? Or do they come from the other place? So it disappears. And they say, what do you think, Horatio? Figment of our imagination? Did we all merely have the same fantasy? Horatio, before my God, I might not disbelieve without the sensible and true avouch of mine own eyes. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe it. But I have seen it. I do believe it. Okay? Marcellus, is it not like the king? Line 57 or 8. Doesn't it look like the king? As thou art to thyself. Okay, look at Marcellus's question again. Is it not like the king? What does the like imply? Similar to. Look at Horatio's response. It's like the king, like you are to yourself. So how are you to yourself? You're both substance and appearance. You are yourself. He's saying it's not like the king. That was the king. That was the dead king. We really saw him. Okay? And he talks about, that's the armor he wore when he defeated Norway before. So they keep talking. And Marcellus asks, why are we on watch? What gives? I mean, we should be at peace, right? He, the previous king, defeated the previous king of Norway. Okay? We should be at peace here. Horatio, oh, I can tell you. So he talks about what happened. The previous king Hamlet Sr. killed Norway Sr. Hamlet Sr. had a son who is Hamlet Jr., you could call him. Norway Sr. had a son who is Norway Jr. Hamlet Sr. and Hamlet Jr. and Claudius are also going to be referred to just as Denmark. In other words, the person becomes the name of the place that he or she rules. Okay? Just like, every now and then, actually, you'll see this a lot in the press. The president, doesn't matter which president it is, could be Trump, Obama, Bush, Nixon, whatever. The president will say something, and the president is speaking on behalf of the United States, and therefore it says, Washington said, or the United States said, okay, because the president becomes equated with the place of his rule. So, Hamlet Sr. killed Norway Sr. Hamlet Jr. is not the king. So we're going to put him like this. His brother, Claudius, is king. Notice, he's king. Okay? What usually happens in a monarchy when a king dies? Goes to the eldest son. Maybe something happens and the eldest son dies. Then who's it go to? Goes to the next eldest son. Use modern England today as an example. If Queen Elizabeth dies tomorrow, who becomes king? Charles, her eldest son. Okay? What if Charles dies? Does Andrew become king? Because that's her next eldest son. No. Why not? Because
the eldest daughter?
close. Charles has 2 sons of his own. See, he's the next one in line. Then if he has children, that eldest one is the next one in line. Shakespeare's histories, which are all about English history, what we see in those plays is what often happened in real English history. You have a king, and that king has a bunch of sons. And the eldest one is king. Okay? But son number 4 wants to be king. What do? Yeah, you bump off 1 through 3. The only problem is, who else do you have to bump off? 1 through 3's children, because they all have prior claims to the throne than you do. Okay? So, he becomes king, but he's not actually the next in line. He's next in line. See, that's the problem at the outset of the play. Claudius shouldn't be king. By the way, there's a modern, very, very modern version of this that you probably all saw multiple times when you were younger. It's a Disney film. It's called The Lion King. This is Mufasa. This is Simba. And this is Scar. Scar kills Mufasa. Simba should be next in line, but no, Scar takes his place. Simba runs away.
I don't know. You're good.
Okay. So, what does Horatio talk about? Because Hamlet Sr. killed Norway Sr., Norway Jr. is kind of on the warpath. What's he want? Okay. He is king of Norway. What else does he want?
He wants Denmark.
How? Why?
Because his dad.
Just because he wants more land?
Killed his dad.
Because he killed his dad. It's revenge. One other thing you need to understand. Germanic society, which these are all part of, which England is part of, okay? The very ing in the name England is the name of an old Germanic god, okay? It's based entirely on this heroic warrior ethos, which ultimately is, we see expressed in the, I don't remember what year it was, 1980s film with Sean Connery and Kevin Costner about the FBI back in the 30s. And it's kind of this idea of, you kill one of ours, we're going to kill 5 of yours. You bring a knife to the fight, I'm going to bring a gun to the fight. Okay? It's this idea of not necessarily an eye for an eye, it's a head for an eye. You blind me, I'm going to kill you. You touch one of mine, I'm going to wipe out your family. Okay? So there's this mentality, and Norway wants to come and he wants to kill the current king, doesn't matter who it is, the current king, and take over Denmark. By the way, Norway is a much larger country than Denmark is. Okay? So, that's why we're on the watch. We got to keep an eye out to make sure that that Norway doesn't land on our coasts. Okay? So, Bernardo says, yeah, I think that's true. I think that probably is it. Well may it, line 108. Well may it sort that this portentous figure, that is, this ghost, this image of the king, he says it is portentous. That means it portends something. Portends means it's a bearer of bad news. Something bad is about to happen. It comes armed through our watch, so like the king that was and is the question of these wars. That is, he's come back armed to the hilt to show us war is coming. War is coming. Horatio's. Yes, you're right. It is. And then Horatio talks about back in ancient Rome, just before Julius Caesar died, what happened? We're coming up on this day. A soothsayer, that is a person who foretold the truth, said, beware the Ides of March. What's the Ides of March? March 15th. Okay? Why did the fortune teller say beware the Ides of March? because the fortune teller had seen Julius Caesar is going to be murdered on that day. And like I said, I'm pretty sure Julius Caesar was written in 1599. So Shakespeare's audience had that play in its mind. They were familiar with it. Okay? So he talks about a bunch of other things that pretended bad stuff happening. And the ghost comes back out. Why does the ghost come back out at that point? Well, he stepped off the stage. I mean, Shakespeare does this. Steps off the stage so they can have this conversation and give us background information. All hell's about to break loose. And then the ghost comes back out. Okay? And Horatio tries to speak to it again. The cock crows, the ghost leaves, and we're told, again, a little bit more kind of popular mythology. Well, what's part of that popular mythology? We heard at the end of Midsummer Night's Dream, okay, which according to your book dates from 1595. Another version I know says that or another edition I have puts it more like 1598, so even a couple of years closer to this. What did we hear Puck say in one of his final speeches? He talks about nighttime and the graves opening and the dead walking in the pathways towards church. Okay? Well, here we hear about the dead walk at night. And if they hear the cock crow, that's time for them to go back to their prisons, back to their graves. But that's only for the dead who die not at peace, or the dead who die what's called unshriven. That is, unrepentant or unconfessed. They died without being able to say to a priest, I was wrong, I did this sin. And the priest could not absolve those individuals from that sin. So they died with sin on their head. Okay? And according to the Catholic system, they then went where?
Purgatory.
They go to purgatory. They don't go to hell. You go to hell, you stay. Purgatory, however, you stay there for a while until your sins are purged from you. Then you go to heaven. Okay? So, they talk about it, and they talk about, that time of year wherein our Savior's birth is celebrated, Christmas, etc. So, they say, we should go tell, where is he? Hamlet Jr. Why? Why tell him? Why not the king? Well, because the ghost was his dad. This has got something to do with Hamlet Jr., they assume. Then we get scene 2. Okay? And what do we have? A room of state in the castle. That is, big room, all kinds of finery, and the king who comes in with his wife and his train, that is all of his followers, all the courtiers and knights attendant and all that kind of stuff. And the king gets a big, long speech. Notice it's not a soliloquy because there's a whole bunch of other people with him. Okay? So what does he say in this speech? We're not going to go through it line by line. But he addresses everybody there, and he talks about 2 things, really. Maybe 3. 1, the dead king, and how sorrowful we all are that my brother died. But then he turns to what? How did he turn his sadness into joy? I married my brother's wife. That is, we buried Hamlet Sr., and it's kind of like I'm away back from the cemetery. I said, Gertrude, you're kind of hot. Want to marry me? Now, in most situations, marrying your brother's wife is called what? Starts with in and ends with cest. It's incest. Okay? According to Christian law, Christian tradition, which Hamlet is in, the play makes it very clear these are Christian people. Okay? It's incest. It's one of the big baddies. It's one of the big no-nos that you don't do. Okay? So he says, to bear our hearts in grief and our whole kingdom to be contracted in one brow of woe. That is, everybody in the kingdom was sorrowful for Hamlet Senior's death. Yet so far hath discretion fought with nature that we with wisest sorrow think on him, together with remembrance of ourselves. Therefore, that is, we thought of him, but we also thought of ourselves. He's using the royal we there. Ourselves means me. Therefore he did what? Our sometime sister, now our queen, the imperial jointress. We are joined, okay, to this warlike state. Have we, as 'twere with a defeated joy, with mirth and funeral dirge and marriage, taken to wife. Does he say, I did this entirely of my own decision and of my own accord? No. He thinks all of them. They consented. They said, no, you go right ahead. Okay? Why is that significant? It's a way of spreading the blame. If I was wrong, then you guys were wrong also for agreeing to this. Okay? So, he talks about the third possible thing, Norway. And so he sends ambassadors, okay? Cornelius and Voltimand come in and leave. And then he talks to Laertes, who is the son of the king's most valued and trusted advisor, a man named Polonius. Okay? And he says, you want to go back to France, right? Because Laertes is a scholar also. He's a student at the University of Paris. He says, yes, I'd like to. Your father said, okay. Yes, he did. Then you can go. That is, you have my leave. And then he addresses Hamlet. Line 64. But now my cousin Hamlet and my son. He doesn't mean cousin like we mean it. It's not literal cousin. It means family member. What literal relation is Hamlet to Claudius? Nephew, right? Hamlet's father was Claudius's brother. So, now my cousin Hamlet and my son. How is he his son? Because he married his mother, stepson. Okay? But then Hamlet delivers what's called an aside. Now, in drama, when a character gives an aside, that's when the character, and usually the character literally turns to the audience and says something. And what is meant there is the audience hears it, but nobody else on the stage hears it. It's kind of like a soliloquy, but the person's not alone on stage. So Hamlet says, a little more than kin and less than kind. More than kin, less than kind. How can you be more than kin? Kin, related. How can you be more than related?
You're married, maybe?
Okay, close. Any of you have family members who are into quote-unquote genealogy? My brother does family genealogy. He's got our family going back, I think on one side of our family, he's got us back to about 900. By looking at birth certificates, death certificates, the whole 9 yards, okay? So he's found out, for example, and this applies, I'm not kidding. I bet it applies to half the people in this room. We're related to Queen Elizabeth. It goes back like 10 generations, but that's where it occurs. Queen Elizabeth, Winston Churchill, Richard Nixon, I mean, just all these people, all right? General Sherman, the guy who marched through the South, he's like a second cousin. So that's quite a bit closer, all right? So, little more than kin. So how can somebody be a little more than 10th cousin to me like Queen Elizabeth is? Well, my brother is immediate relation. How is Claudius a little more than kin? Think cousin, 4th time removed. He's his uncle. That's a pretty close relation. The only way you really get closer than that is dad.
So Claudius is the uncle of Hamlet Jr.
Claudius is Hamlet Jr.'s uncle. Okay? And stepfather. Okay? So he's uncle and stepfather. And less than kind. Less than kind. Kind there doesn't have its central contemporary meaning of nice. It has the meaning kind, as in we would say, what kind of phone is this? Well, this is an iPhone. What other kinds of phone can you have? You can have a Samsung, you can have a Nokia, you can have... So what's meant there by kind? There, what's meant is brand, okay? But what does it really get at? What type of thing? Hamlet, he's more than kin, but he's less than kind. Kind there means natural. Nature. What kind of thing is it? What is its nature? So if I had said, what kind of thing is this? Everybody would have said phone. Because the kind of thing of this is different than this, right? Because what kind of thing is this? It's a bottle. Totally different kinds. So, go away. So, more than kin, pretty close relation, but unnatural. Why? Incest. Uncles shouldn't marry mothers. Goes against the laws. Okay, we'll stop there and we'll pick up there and we'll probably be on Hamlet for the next month.